Hey guys, so I am going to do another episode of my Supplementals Presidents books because I still have quite a few of those to go through. But don't worry, this one is not going to be as long as my last one, which is on Nixon, because I'm feeling kind of like that. That's how I feel today. So this is going to be done in a hoodie and it's going to be pretty fast, but don't take that as a reflection on the books, just take that as a reflection of my mental health. Okay? Sweet. So I'm calling this segment kind of like behind the scenes. Many of the books in this round are books that cover not necessarily presidents, but they cover things happening behind the scenes at the White House, behind the scenes in presidencies, maybe sometimes people that we don't think as much about, or that I certainly haven't as I've been going through all of these books. To start with, I'm going to talk about 5 presidents, My Extraordinary Journey with Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, and Ford by Clint Hill. Clint Hill is one, I think, of the most famous Secret Service agents, possibly because of his books and possibly because of one of his places in history. He was one of the Secret Service agents next to the car when President Kennedy was shot. As the book's title suggests, he was hired during the Eisenhower administration and served until the Ford administration. So that's 5 presidents that he was in the Secret Service for. He also left the presidential detail kind of in the middle of that to go be Jacqueline Kennedy, and then eventually Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis's personal choice for the Secret Service. They were very close, and he did write another book about those years with Jackie. So this book doesn't focus on that. It's purely presidential focused, but I've heard both are very good. For the purposes of this book, it's really fascinating, because the Secret Service sees things that we never see. They go places that many other people don't go. And while Clint Hill is very careful to, keep his oath, he's not, telling you super sordid secrets or super personal secrets, he does give you a different view of the presidents of these people and how they were as presidents. So that's really, really interesting. After the Kennedy assassination, Clint Hill also undergoes some very serious personal trauma, as did many people on that day. But having witnessed what he witnessed, being so close to it, he was the first to get to Jackie and Jack after the event. It really did a number on him personally. So as much as this is a historical book showing you the inside lives of 5 separate presidents, it's also talking about the strain that things like being a Secret Service agent can do to people. And they're often people whose their job is not to be noticed, their job is not to be seen, not to interfere, but to protect and to potentially lay down their lives, as many of them have in fact, or been injured in the line of duty protecting our presidents. So it was just really interesting to read. I know there are some other books by other Secret Service agents that I have not read, but this was a really good one to start with. So now I'm going to talk about 2 separate books by the same author, Kate Anderson Brower. I have to look at it when I tell you because I keep wanting to call her Kate Anderson Bauer, and that's not her name, it's Brower. You can see the photo that I'm going to put in and post, it's fine. But so she has written several books, and this isn't the last time you'll hear her name necessarily, but she wrote for the first women, The Grace and Power of America's Modern First Ladies. So this is obviously a book on modern first ladies, mostly starting with Mamie Eisenhower. When this book was published, Michelle Obama was the reigning first lady, and so it only covers up to her, so there is no Melania Trump, which will become important in a second. And I found this really, really fascinating. Again, as much as I've been reading about American presidents, oftentimes their wives do not feature in the books very prominently, or when they do, of course, it's all related to the president's life. So you really don't get an insight to how their lives were or are as first ladies. So I really, really appreciated this book Brower is also a fantastic writer, as proved by the fact that I believe at this point I've read almost everything that she's published in this vein. I really enjoy her writing style. So it made me realize that I also really need to go back and read other First Lady books that aren't just modern First Ladies, that aren't just Mamie Eisenhower, Jackie Kennedy, Lady Bird Johnson. I did do the book Lady Bird and Lyndon, which showed up in another Supplementals episode. And then you also have Pat Nixon. I'm trying to name them all in order, and it's not gonna work. It's a great topic to read about, and again, if that's not your thing, Brower has also written First in Line, Presidents, Vice Presidents, and the Pursuit of Power. And this book was published during the Trump presidency, and so it does contain information on former Vice President Mike Pence. So it goes a little bit more forward in time since the last book. And again, if the First Lady features very little in these biographies, oftentimes the Vice President is almost entirely absent, unless they're a Vice President who eventually becomes president, because, you know, hindsight is 2020, and we know that these people's lives will become important. But there are tons of Vice Presidents whose names I don't even remember. Yeah, I've read this book, and there are some of them, and I was like, that was who's Vice President? So, you know, we remember that Richard Nixon was Eisenhower's Vice President, but who was Franklin Pierce's Vice President? Who, like, I couldn't even tell you. How many Vice Presidents did FDR have? It's more than I always think, because I remember, obviously, Harry S. Truman, then there was Henry Wallace, but prior to that was John Nance Garner. So, you know, oftentimes, until basically Jimmy Carter's Vice President Walter Mondale really helped revitalize and reimagine that office into something a little bit more exciting, John Nance Garner said that it was not worth a warm bucket of spit, but not the word spit, a four-letter word I don't want to say for YouTube guideline purposes. And it was mostly just going to funerals, according to Gerald Ford and Richard Nixon. So it's really interesting how these lives function, and something that you don't hear about. So another thing that I'd be really interested to read more specific books on, people who lived in the vice presidency and did not become president, because obviously I've read the life of VPs who become president quite frequently. But again, Kate Anderson Brower is one of my favorite author finds in this entire adventure. Speaking of very important people that you never hear about, I also read The Gatekeepers, How the White House Chiefs of Staff Define Every Presidency by Chris Whipple. This was also published during the Obama presidency, so it only goes that far. But I was flabbergasted by how interesting this book was. I checked it out on a lark. I didn't think maybe that I was going to enjoy it. But the people who are the chief of staff, you know, Richard Nixon's chief of staff, Bob Haldeman, for example, is infamous. But there have been presidencies where there's not enough control, presidencies that have literally spiraled. Ronald Reagan's presidency is a good example of what happens with both good and bad chiefs of staff. George H.W. Bush's made one of Reagan's chiefs of staff, then his Secretary of State. I have an audiobook on hold about James A. Baker III, who goes on to really be one of the most important people in Washington by some accounts for a substantial period of time. And I mean, there are people who were chiefs of staff whose names I know because they go on to do important things. I don't, like, they were a chief of staff to a president. I don't know that. I mean, I'm paying more attention now, but it was really incredible, and it really speaks to how human dynamics work, and it was just a really engaging book. I really enjoyed it, and I'm glad that I checked it out. Now, I'm hesitant to include this book here, but I feel that I should, because it was not a biography, but it's not behind the scenes in the same way as those other 4 books. But I will talk a bit about Thomas DeFrank's Write It When I'm Gone, off-the-record conversations with Gerald R. Ford. This is an incredibly interesting book. So the idea was Thomas DeFrank's was a reporter who first began to interview and engage with Gerald R. Ford when he became vice president. He was one of the small team assigned to cover Ford's engagements around the country. And the original group of reporters for Ford's, trips became really, really close and had a really close relationship. And particularly Thomas and Gerald R. Ford had a close working relationship, and that continued when he became president. And then after the presidency, Ford granted DeFrank's the ability to interview him for long periods of time, talk about most world issues, his presidency, the presidency of his people who came before him, people who came after him. But his one stipulation was that DeFrank's could not publish anything out of those interviews until after Gerald Ford had died. So it's very honest, very open, very interesting, and it's also a description of life after the presidency for the most part, because DeFrank's doesn't begin doing these specific interviews until Gerald Ford is out of office. So it focuses on a period of time which often in normal biographies are completely skimmed over because most of the interesting stuff has passed. And then it has Gerald Ford saying insightful, smart, sometimes biting things about Ronald Reagan, about Richard Nixon. Not as juicy as you wish it was, because Gerald Ford seems to have been a pretty decent person, but it's just interesting and it's different, and I've never read another book like it. So I know that I really enjoyed it. I can't speak much to how much it leaves in or leaves out because I've not read my Gerald Ford biography yet, but it's definitely not a biography. You can't substitute it for that. But it's again, insightful human commentary on an aspect of the presidency from a president, about presidents, kind of behind the scenes that, again, Ford was honest because he refused to let DeFrank's publish it until after he died. And also you see DeFrank's have a relationship with Ford right up until the moment that he dies. He sees him very close to the end of his life and how, his decline and his death. And again, I've not read a full biography on Gerald Ford, but I felt incredibly sad at the end of this book. So DeFrank's really makes you feel like you have a personal connection to Ford, and it was just really fascinating. So I wouldn't say it's a must read, but if it's of interest to you, it's not a bad way to spend some time. It's not that long. So there you go. 5 behind the scenes books, and I am all set. So I am gonna go and stress eat some Girl Scout cookies and wrap myself up in a blanket and drink some tea. I hope that whatever you are doing is also about self-care, because some days just be like that. Thanks, guys. Bye.